Great.
Hello, hello. Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us live on this LinkedIn. Sorry for being a bit late. I think we're taking it as an experiment, so doing this for the first time and having some technical issues as usual. We are the experts in blockchain, not the experts in LinkedIn just yet, so give us a bit of a break. And thank you so much for being with us. Viara, Morva, and Aditra, thank you so much for joining us for this LinkedIn Live as well. We are going to go just briefly through the introduction of what this is all about, why we have gathered, why we have put so much work in last week. And then we have a couple of questions that we are also going to be addressing. So keep up with us. And if you have any questions or comments, please use the section comment below the LinkedIn post that we have created to sort of disseminate the information about this event. If there's going to be anything, you can also ping us over the Telegram. I think we're all very much used to that channel as well. So if there's going to be anything, we're going to be speaking about IOSCO submission for possibly months. But just to begin, we wanted to kind of give you a bit of an introduction about the IOSCO submission. So on the 19th of October, which was last week, Thursday, the European Crypto Initiative, the EUCI, Canadian Web3 Council, the Blockchain Association Singapore, and Bharat Web3 Association from India submitted our response to the policy recommendations for decentralized finance, the DeFi consultation of IOSCO. So IOSCO stands for the International Organizations of Securities Commission, in which they call for a more tailored approach towards DeFi instead of expecting decentralized finance to fall squarely into the existing regulatory categories of the so-called traditional finances. This is now the second IOSCO report that we have really taken a good look into and that we have responded to. If you have recalled or if you have been following us before, you have seen that the EUCI and the Canadian Web3 Council have already responded to one of the previous IOSCO calls. This one in particular actually focuses on DeFi and does a really deep dive into what DAOs are, what decentralization looks like, and what are the responsibilities of CASPs, etc. So the work is really just a continuation of the previous really fruitful collaboration between EUCI and the Canadian Council, which, as previously said, was submitted a few months ago. So without further ado, we do have a couple of questions that we want to look into, and I'm going to give the word to Viara to kick us off here.
Perfect. Yes, thank you. And probably it might be a good thing to do the overview of what's in the document before that.
Sure.
And maybe we can then go with the first question. I'm going to ask it now, so you guys can think about it. And then we can actually answer this once we also have this context. So the first question that we have prepared is, please share more about your local context. What's the state of crypto and DeFi regulation in your jurisdiction? And before we answer that, let's go through what actually the IOSCO report was asking and how we tackled those questions.
Right. So the IOSCO report is pretty long. It's separated into a couple of sections. And just to give you a good understanding, there is the introduction section, the state of the DeFi market section that sort of speaks about what it currently looks like or what were the issues. And then the third section might actually be the one, the most important one. So it really goes into the recommendations and guidelines. Those recommendations were the ones that then IOSCO was asking us to kind of comment on, and they were asking whether we agree with those recommendations. And then there's the fourth section where IOSCO goes presents the questions to the public, and the annexes where they go into the recent events and the impact on DeFi, the DeFi exploits, attacks, and illicit uses. We're going to be addressing that a bit further on with the questions. There's also an annex tackling the data gaps and challenges, the DeFi governance. This one is an extensive one. They go really deep into what the DAOs are, how the DAOs are being governed, how the voting is happening in there. And then there's an update on all the risks and considerations relating to the DeFi activities. There's also sort of a mapping activity where they put together everything that has to do with DeFi activities. And then just the final annex, which goes along with the survey of the results and outreach. So this is a very brief summary. It's a long, really long report. I do recommend looking at it and, of course, going through the whole report, going through all the recommendations and all the sections was really necessary for us to even know and be updated so that we knew what their thinking behind was, so that we knew what was the basis for them to actually even go along with the recommendations.
Thank you, Anya. Yes, and perhaps it's good to also go through the recommendations themselves.
Sure.
Morva, do you mind going through them? Would that be something that you're passionate about doing? Because, and also, in the meantime, I think it's good to kind of give a brief introduction of who we are. So, yeah, we are Viara and Tanya. We are from the European Crypto Initiative, and we're really happy to have Aritra from the Bharat Web3 Association and Morva from the Canadian Web3 Council. And I can see that Morva is having some technical difficulties. So we'll go through the recommendations while that is fixed.
Sure.
So Anya, do you happen to have them open?
Yeah. Let me tackle that. Right, so the first recommendation was really about the analyze DeFi product services, arrangements, and activities to assess the regulatory responses. The second recommendation was going more into the identification of responsible persons. I'll just briefly stop here just because we are addressing the recommendations already. The responsible persons here are identified, or how the recommendation wants to identify them is very, very vague. So in a very general, broad sense, some were even noticing that this might subsume, for example, GitHub as being one of the responsible possible persons. So we really wanted to kind of give IOSCO feedback here and say, all right, so we're all down for identifying who the responsible person is, but we also need to figure out what are those responsibilities, how many responsible persons we are actually dealing with, and what are the differences between those. Recommendation number 3 goes into the achieving common standards of regulatory outcomes. Once again, and I think this is actually prevailing the whole overall IOSCO response along with the report itself, we do want to have a common standard when it comes to regulatory outcomes. So there is, this common principle that we are all fairly familiar with, which is the same activities, same risks, same regulatory outcome. This is something that we want to strive for. However, we do want to achieve that everybody is very mindful of having different circumstances whenever we are talking about similar activities and similar risks. So nonetheless, even though, for example, a regulatory framework as is, or a new regulatory framework might want to be achieved, we want to keep in mind over and over again that there needs to be almost like a bespoke regime, an ad hoc regime specifically for DeFi activities, because there's so many differences between the traditional finances and what now we call the DeFi. Recommendation number 4 talks about the requirement of identification and addressing of conflicts of interests. Here, I think we have extensively written about this already in our first submission to IOSCO a couple of months ago. This is definitely something we want to be a bit more mindful of. Speaking to the community, we also noticed that there is interest from projects, for example, or individuals, that those conflicts of interest are quite often put on the table, disclosed, and that we openly talk about them. However, one thing that we wanted to be, again, mindful of is that the conflict of interest really are just disclosed and not necessarily prohibited, because we cannot achieve the prohibition of those. Recommendation number 5 talks about the requirement for the identification and addressing of the material risks, including operational and technological risks. Here, there is, again, plenty to be said on this topic. There is a lot of operational and technological risks that we are trying to achieve, or that we are trying to recognize. We really wanted to be careful when we are talking about those risks, knowing that everybody is basically just tackling or dealing with the cutting edge technology, and that this is really just mathematical formulas that we are discovering on the go. So knowing that there are risks, we also wanted to kind of put some light onto the residual risks, as in no matter what we do today, there might be still risks existing in the future that we have not been aware for, let's say, 10 years. and then all of a sudden there's an exploit, there's something that shows that there was risk all along. So we're a bit mindful of that one. The recommendation 6 goes for the requirement of clear, accurate, and comprehensive disclosures. Yes, there was a lot to be said on that topic as well. With regard to disclosures, it's all about where, for example, the code is being written, what types of documents are being made available, how these risks or data is being disclosed, everything basically that has to do with disclosure and how properly the risks are being managed thereof. The recommendation number 7 goes about the enforcement of applicable laws. And here, once again, and as previously said over and over again, we have put an emphasis on the ad hoc, the bespoke DeFi regime, so that it's not necessarily just, we have these laws that have previously been applicable for the finances, streamlines, or for these types of transactions. We cannot just take all the existing laws and put them on the new activities that we have today. We really have to be mindful of what are the differences thereof. The recommendation number 8 goes for the promotion of cross-border cooperation and information sharing. This is for sure something that we all are striving for. This is nevertheless why we have coupled joined forces with all the rest of the organizations in responding to IOSCO. And we do believe that this should be done on the regulatory side as well. That being said, right now, there is no bespoke regimes as such just yet. Whenever it comes to that, we do want to see how, for example, the licenses that are going to be provided to certain projects are also going to be recognized in other jurisdictions as well. So definitely we want to go in that direction along with the policymakers. And then recommendation number 9, which is the last recommendation in this report, is about the understanding and assessing the interconnections among the DeFi market, the broader crypto asset market, and traditional financial markets. So this is something that is very, very interesting. We are talking throughout the response about the decentralization rather being a spectrum and not just a black and white scenario. And as you have seen probably, and what we have observed with the DeFi maturity or the growth on the market, is that these markets are all coming together very, very well. So it's not going to be separated. It's not going to be in silos. There's going to be more and more of these interconnections, and cross-border interoperability is just one of those. So yeah, there's plenty of recommendations that we wanted to actually put in there as well, and how to guide the regulators and say, yes, they should be enforced, and we sort of support that. That's all in our response. So 9 recommendations, that's basically it.
Thank you for this overview, Anya. Morva, I'm really hoping that you solved the microphone issue. Maybe try saying something. That something can be an introduction of who you are if you feel like it. Can you?
Hello?
Yes, perfect. Yes.
Okay. Sorry, it was an issue with Google Chrome, I think. Yes, I'm Morva Rouhani. I'm the Executive Director of the Canadian Web3 Council. This is, as Viara mentioned, this is our second time collaborating with the with the EUCI folks on IOSCO. I really think that increasing our efforts to work together is important, as regulators are, obviously, to present a united front to regulators and to ensure that we're all saying the same thing to them. So this is obviously a very important report, because I do think that regulation of DeFi at the local level in many countries is at its infancy, or perhaps it's something that hasn't even been looked at least that's the case in Canada. And this is, to us at least, this is the first step in even looking at the space, or this part of the space from a regulatory standpoint. And I've heard from regulators in Canada that they're working closely on this report, and so obviously the outcome of it will have implications for us locally, and likely elsewhere as well.
Thank you so much for this, and for also answering the question I initially asked. So Aritra, I think you weren't able to hear the answer, the question, sorry. So I'm gonna read it again and then ask you to also introduce yourself before answering. So the question is, please share more about your local context and what's the state of crypto and DeFi regulation in your jurisdiction. Basically, as a side question, it's how do you expect IOSCO's work and this report in particular to have an influence on the situation in India?
Yeah, thanks, Farah. Hi, Morva. Hi, Anja. So I'll quickly introduce myself. I run a company called ANQ. We are a DeFi company. We're a CeFi and a DeFi company, but I'm also part of the Bharat Web3 Association from India. In terms of the local context, I'll be honest and blunt, I don't think much has changed over the years. The last time we actually saw something change in India in terms of crypto and DeFi, the word DeFi was not even being used or passed around, right, in policy recommendations. It was a very exchange-dominated industry we had in India. So that's one. And that was a time when there was a big legal case which was fought against RBI over here, against the ban which happened, right? From that till now, honestly, nothing much has moved. I'll be bluntly honest. I mean, although papers have been created and Bharat Web3 Association, all these companies have come across. So the thing that has changed is on the Web3 side of things. That is on the company side of things, the approach side of things. Because largely in the last 7 to 8 years in India, you go and talk to any regulator, like the regulator who actually makes a decision, or the junior ones also. For them, crypto meant crypto is equal to Web3 is equal to an exchange and token. That's it. The debate used to stop over there, right? What has happened in the last, after I think a year after COVID, new type of companies started coming out, like companies which were just using the tech layer, the base tech layer of blockchain and creating products, nothing to do with launching a token and all of that, right? That got the comfort of the government. That got the comfort of the government, state, as well as the center. Now, that's the context, right? Now, what's happening with DeFi in India, honestly, now there are two things which are happening. One, which is out there in the media, one, which is happening hand in hand with regulators, as well as with particular state governments. And actual projects are being done. Where when I say projects, these are, project is actually a wrong word. Business is happening, where large deals are being done between Web3 companies and the state governments and central governments. Those are all DeFi projects which are happening. I'll give you a few examples without obviously clearly naming the companies. Now, there is a purchase order financing, which is happening on blockchain, again through DeFi. But this is happening for one of the largest oil companies in India, state-run oil companies. That's happening on blockchain. That's again a the DeFi solution which has gone out, right? Nothing to do with tokens. Now, what has happened in DeFi in India? Are there clear laws? No, there are no clear laws, right? The tax part still hits you hard if say 4 of us still want to build a company in DeFi, but people still are building products and solutions of that. But what has largely happened, and which is what I find the most impactful thing which has happened in crypto and Web3 in India, and I think it's the smartest way to do it, right? On one way, we all have policymakers, private policymakers like folks like you and us, who have gone and sat with the government for over the years and explained to them, this is what crypto is, this is what DeFi is, this is what solutions can be made, right? But then these are also smart folks, right? They'll ask you, but how does it impact my balance sheet? Now, the economic boys will ask you, how does it impact my country, right? You tell me. We met a member of parliament. We met this is 23rd of October, right? Couple of days ago, right? He asked a very simple question. This is great. You guys are doing great business, but how does it impact my constituency where I have fought the elections for? Simple as straight questions. So from a impact perspective, and that's why I'm being very honest and blunt. From an impact perspective, I don't see, and I haven't seen DeFi yet impacting the local voter over here. Because all of this is also connected to how a country is run. If it is not impacting the voter base beyond a point, I don't think public representatives beyond a point will be interested. Or it has to be an issue of national security, like what happened with the drone laws in India, right? That's why I keep saying this across the world. Look at how drone laws were reversed in India. Initially, it was said, just like crypto, it was said it's a threat. DeFi is a threat. It's a threat to the economy. It's a threat to that. 2 years, the entire drone laws were reversed in India. And now you have great things happening in the drone. So having said that, what's happening in DeFi in India, less on the regulation side, but what's happening in India is there are certain government agencies which have actually allowed sandboxes to be created. sandboxes to be created. And this has actually happened. It's done, it's dusted, it's published. There are companies who have come on board, who have been doing all of that. The couple of state governments in India, like you have the Telangana state government in India down south, then you have GIFT City. There's a lot of work which is happening over there, which is now openly saying, legally saying, come build DeFi products. Come build anything which is between traditional finance stack and your decentralized finance stack. What can you build in between? So what the government, I mean, I can't speak behalf of the government. What we have understood, because we have also built a company which is very similar, which is between TradFi and DeFi. What we have understood is, till the time they have capital flight in place, those capital controls in place, folks over here, largely authorities over here, are okay for you to build any kind of DeFi solutions, whether it's cross-border, whether it's up doing the investment part to MSMEs in India. That's what has happened. So largely it has to do with stuff like that. And also there's a lot of talk, a lot of serious talk, which was talk for a few months ago, but not a lot of movement has happened behind the scenes on the retail and the wholesale rollout of CBDCs in India, right? That is also in a way DeFi, but from the government side, right? That has largely happened. But in terms of a clear-cut law, in terms of a clear-cut regulation, I still don't think that is in place, largely because you compare it with the TradFi industry, compare it with how big the bond market is. Regulators on top still haven't, and this is a very honest thing I've seen, we've been fighting in this for the last 10 years in India. I still don't think regulators have seen volumes. I still don't think they've seen economic impact. Does it actually change anything back? It's business for them. For us, crypto means everything because it's our bread and butter. But for them, it's one of the industries which is part of this country, right? Which is growing up and all of that. So I'll pause at that. That's largely what's been happening in India. Great on the private sector front, great on the state government and the center government. There's actual work happening where they're inviting through sandbox models and all. But in terms of clear push toward what it means, I still think a lot of maturity needs to be, and a handholding needs to be done between banks and these folks. Because you go and talk to CIOs of banks, they understand this. But then there are also regulators sitting on top. They're like, oh, is this token related? Because we are asked every time as a company, are you launching a token? If you're launching a token, then we can't collaborate with you, right? I'm like, no, we're not launching a token. This is a legal paper. We're never going to launch a token. So that comfort, I still think we're still a couple of years away, bluntly honest. So yeah, that's what's happening in India.
That's amazing. Yes, Morgan, go on.
I just want to echo what you're saying, because it's a similar situation in Canada. Even like the conversation for the past few years has been so focused on exchanges, because that's where governments are seeing the volumes, right? But even in that context, I think that's where they just see the most risk to them. But when you're talking about even stablecoin volumes, like I heard straight from a regulator a few weeks ago that's like, oh, we're just not seeing this being that big right now for us to dedicate resources to it right now. And DeFi even less so, right? And so it's interesting because I think outside of securities regulators, governments, folks who are supposed to be policy making, folks who are supposed to be law making, are just not seeing the reason why they should be stepping in at this point. And in the Canadian context, it's like, well, some of our regulators have stepped in. Is it appropriate for it to be securities regulators? Is it not? That's a question that nobody seems to care about in Canada. I think it's more so about who is actually interested in this and how can we justify their involvement in this. And that's how it's been going in Canada. And it's because if you talk to a federal elected official or even bureaucrats at the federal level in Canada, they'll tell you that that there isn't political interest in this. There also isn't they do their own surveys, they do their own polling, they're seeing some of the volumes and they're just like, well, whatever, right? It's just not mission critical for them. And that tends to be, and the broader context of it is, at least in the Canadian context, but probably elsewhere as well, is like we're in post-pandemic era. There's massive affordability pressures. There's wars happening and governments are like, we have bigger fish to fry right now. And so I would say for the next few years, we probably won't see interest in this from a political standpoint unless it's really on fire. So it would be not in a good context. And And I do think that we're going to be dealing with very specific regulators who are specifically interested in containing risk in this space. And so until we see that political interest, we'll continue to have to push back on a securities framework being imposed on the space.
Thank you both. It's great to have this point of view, especially as you know that we in Europe have been moving quite fast when it comes to crypto regulation. Even though I don't think we were necessarily ready or at this level, we already have the markets in crypto assets regulation that in terms of DeFi, it explicitly leaves DeFi outside of the scope of this regulation. But of course, we then have the big question mark, what exactly is DeFi? So that's basically the $1 million question that we also as an organization will try to answer in the next months and years. But what's interesting, and also echoing what you both said, because even though DeFi is out of MiCA, there are still attempts to kind of start putting it somewhere within the overall framework. And one of the arguments is also that, yes, there currently the risk isn't as substantial, so it's not really such a high priority. But in any case, we already need to start thinking in that direction. So there are already conversations of MiCA 2 that is also dubbed DeFi 1 that would be focusing entirely on DeFi. So in a sense, everything that we're currently doing together will reflect directly into what is going to happen in Europe, even though it's early at this point to even be certain what we mean by DeFi. So in a sense, that's the European perspective. We are likely moving faster than the rest of the world and will affect also how the rest of the world understands those broader categories for better or worse. But it's all very, very much work in progress at the moment in Europe as well. Anya, I don't know if you feel like adding something or if you guys want to chip in with something else. Otherwise, we can move to the next.
Maybe worth noticing, just because you did go into how do we even define DeFi or decentralization in the first place. So this has been something that has been haunting us for years since we've actually heard about the decentralized autonomous organizations, and we went with each of those letters and each of those words and trying to define what it actually means to have a decentralized organization in the first place, or decentralized finances, if that's actually the matter, the subject at hand. So the recommendations, and IOSCO also goes into that direction, and they do sort of mention the spectrum of decentralization, which was something that we have also seen with the European regulators, especially the French one, which the ACPR and the AMF, they both issued a DeFi discussion paper. They both actually went into that direction as well, as in moving from decentralization really just being a contrast to the centralized services, but rather presenting a spectrum. And we did extensively write about that. There's Professor Carla Race, that have extensively wrote the articles about how, for example, there has been a spectrum before, how there is different trade-offs, how we have to actually navigate through and see what we can how we can justify the decentralization in the first place, or which layers, to which level we are even decentralized. That's one thing. Another thing is that there's also centralized vectors, as in, as soon as somebody, for example, imposes a feature on a smart contract, or as soon as somebody demands that, for example, the smart contract is upgradable, or that there is a feature of shutting it down, this presents a centralized vector added in its own, as in somebody will have to make a decision when, for example, to terminate a smart contract, or somebody will have to make a decision when to upgrade a smart contract. So whenever there is a decision to be made, whenever there is a feature on the smart contract, on a protocol layer, or on the application layer, there's actually a point for the centralization to make its play, or to be a bit more important. And those are possibly even ways for the regulator to think, okay, well, then there has to be a responsible person that is going to be triggering that button, or that is going to make that decision effective, so that the smart contract really is going to upgrade, or so that the protocol is going to change, etc. So those little tiny bits do present negotiation power, sort of, just because we do know that scenarios are not going to stay black and white, and we are hopefully going in a direction where we can find negotiation power on both ends. So offer something to the regulators, say, yes, there are people, there are projects, there are certain individuals that are responsible because decisions have been made, or because the power has really been centralized in the hands of one or a group of persons. And on the other side, we do want them to recognize that certain layers of the technological stack are really fully decentralized, or really do not have such centralized vectors, such centralized characteristics, so that they could enforce and impose the rules in the first place. What we have also been witnessing now, or where the research has led us, is the conclusion that the first layer, so the protocol layer, is going to narrate how decentralized the upper layers of the technological stack are going to be. So if you have a protocol that is not decentralized at all, it is highly unlikely that the application layers are going to be recognized as being decentralized just because they rely on something that is centralized in the first place. So all those points of reasoning are finding their way into the response that we have submitted to the IOSCO, and we hope to actually have the opportunity to explore them even further on in the future.
Great. Thank you for this addition, Anya. And I think it goes great with the next question. That is exactly of what can we expect from IOSCO, and basically what is the expected effect and general importance of the IOSCO work, and this paper in particular in your jurisdiction. I think we somewhat touched upon it when answering the first question, but if you can go into more details, Morvan, Eritrea, and obviously we will also chip in from Europe, it would be great. Morvan, maybe you can go first if that's okay.
Well, I know that our regulators sit on the working group for this, and they're heavily involved in IOSCO, and they take IOSCO recommendations seriously. So from a Canadian standpoint, I mean, I would say it's of great importance because it provides direction locally. But also to some extent, our regulators have been involved in IOSCO to steer it as well. So I would say it has a great importance in the local context, especially with what we were saying before about the lack of policy or political direction in this space. And it just allows regulators who are involved in this space, whether or not it's appropriate for them to be or not will remain to be seen in the next few years. But it further entrenches their involvement in this space. So from in that respect, it's definitely important to us.
And in terms of the report, and I'll give you an example how most regulators in India, whether they deal with the fintech side of things, the financial side of things, or even deal with other departments of the government, where there is some touch point of crypto or Web3 which will impact them, other departments of the government. Pardon me. What is the part that has really heartened me, and the part that I've really liked over the year, especially the last 3 years, is they've been very open to recommendations from like this from outside, right? Not only from in India, because if we also do it, like, okay, there's a bias, right? 12 companies, 15 companies, 20 companies, we're doing it for us. So there's always a bias in the mind. But when you have recommendations like this come up from across the globe, and in terms of an institution like this, they really embrace it. And even when I'll give you an example, even if it's a tax authority, the folks who create the tax laws in India, you take these kind of stuff back to them, they embrace it, they touch point it, like, okay, this is what other countries are thinking, this is what other institutions are thinking, what part of it can I tweak it back into our laws in India? Because if you look at most financial laws in India, we also work a little similar to, without naming other countries, we also work a little similar to some some of the other countries in terms of how they have made their financial regulations, right? So this is not the first time, and that part I'm really happy what these folks have done, the bureaucrats in India have done, especially the finance bureaucrats, right? They've all, even the folks that deal with national security, they've always been open to recommendations like this, whether the 6 or 7 recommendations that Anja was talking about initially, right? Because for them it's like this is also geopolitical in nature. Because earlier it used to be just a business and a crypto, small tech thing in India, but now crypto is a big geopolitical thing in India. Why? Because what decisions India will take, it also will impact its neighbors, its partners, the business partners that they do trade with, India's country trades with, right? So in that context, I think India's been smart enough not to jump to a conclusion in terms of, you know what, this is right, this is wrong, let's do it, bang, end of story. But they've been very smart and cordial about, you know what, Vaira is a friend, Morva is a friend, Anja is a friend. Let me put it in a plate in a manner that impacts all our 4 partners in the right way. Trade is done in the right way. So we can impact it we can put it in the trade pact between 2 countries. So that way, I think they've been pretty diplomatic about that in terms of not rushing to a decision. But of course, there are still ideas of, you know, I mean, we would have read the papers 2 days ago. Somebody from the government said banning is still the best thing. I'm like, okay, fine, you know, that's still a possibility on the paper. But yeah, they normally embrace items like this, and it helps our arguments, and in terms of their arguments, if ever there is a whatever bill or a law in this country for such kind of thing. So
yeah, I don't we might actually touch upon MiCA as well, and what's going to be the situation here in Europe. I previously mentioned that the ACPR and the AMF, both being the French regulators, are actually working on DeFi discussion papers already. As Viara has previously mentioned, DeFi is sort of excluded from MiCA, but it remains to be seen how, for example, the national competent authorities are going to do the evaluation of what now falls under MiCA, what falls out of the MiCA. So what really means under that recital 22 in MiCA to have a fully decentralized protocol. That remains a question, and just previously speaking about the scope of decentralization, now we see that MiCA is not really thinking about the scope at all. So what we can expect from the regulators or the national competent authorities is to look into these reports, into what has been done on the international scale, and try to incorporate that in their thinking, in their evaluation processes. So yeah, there is definitely going to be further discussions around the DeFi. Something that Aritra has also mentioned before and really resonated with me are the incidents. All those, you know, hectic things that are happening in DeFi that gives us the heart attacks because this is our bread and butter, right? But for the regulators, these are the things that really, raise the awareness. So these are the things that penetrate all the social media and all the news posts that are flooding our email inboxes. And they do reach the regulators as well. So since it has happened, the Terra Luna, the FTX, all those incidents that don't really have to do much with the DeFi are hitting our table, and every single report and over again, we actually have to defend our positions and say this doesn't have to do much with the DeFi. This actually is just a raw company. This, you know, is a scam. And we really play a huge role here to kind of demystify all those incidents that were happening, having back and forth communications. And what is to be expected is that this is going to repeat. So whatever incidents there's going to be, whenever there's going to be a hype, right now we might be in a bear market, but as soon as there's going to be more interest in this space, as soon as there's going to be more influx of money and the projects are going to grow again, there's going to be incidents. So if we already knew how, for example, the regulators have reacted before, we now can be far more prepared, far better prepared. We can have more conversations with them, explain to them what exactly was happening and how this differs from having a DeFi incident and having something that really is connected to DeFi risks in comparison to something that doesn't really.
Yeah. I'll share an example, if I may, Vaira. Obviously, without naming, I'll get into trouble. But long back, 20 years ago, when I think there were still very heavy-duty laws in India in terms of how do you buy or get a commercial computer, personal computer for commercial usage, right? There were a lot of laws around that. You had to go to Delhi to get a license and all that many decades back, before when the IT service industry was starting. At that point of time, I still remember an incident that a bureaucrat told me, and that I think crypto is still in that somewhere around that. So there was a customs officer who was made to sit near a satellite, a dish on top of a building, and like just the customs officer and like just check what data is going out and stuff like that. So funny incidents like that, it has happened. And I think crypto is still like that, because the moment FTX happened, some of us were all sitting in government offices. They're like, what you saying DeFi and all, see what has happened. Some Sam Balkman has ran away with billions. Imagine that shit happening in India. It's worse for everybody. So that's why I think it's pretty globalized in nature. But the other thing that I think we all need to change in our approach in terms of how we communicate from an industry perspective also, in terms of the stuff that's been written in the paper also. I think, and it's still happening by and large, the larger Web3 industry, or the larger, whatever's happening in DeFi, right? Most of the communication that comes out, it is coming out as a competition to the TradFi industry. It is coming out as something which is going to better the banks. I mean, bloody hell, banks have done what they've done, good, bad, ugly, for the last 100 years, right? The moment you put a communication out there, I mean, money is a tool at the end of the day, right? And there's a reason there are layers of laws and power, and then the way it is played, right? I think we need to break off away from that, and we need to politely put in all this stuff is good, KYC, ML, and all of that, right? But I think we need to pull in a layer where you need to have these big boys in TradFi shake hands with the new guys in DeFi. Like, you know what, this is a stack which will help your stack, and then you put your layers of laws and policy around that. You comfort them. I mean, you shake hands, and it happens. Because the moment, even today, 2023, even today, when I go out and talk to some of these regulators, the moment I say decentralized finance, everything's off. The meeting is gone. First 5 minutes is gone. So then we don't say things like, we say it's progressively decentralized. This is why you need that. You can't remove all these layers, right? Even from a law and a policy perspective, you can remove few of the things, but you still need some layers for both the industries to work on. So,
but see, this is actually where the challenge with the IOSCO schema was, because they have presented like a flowchart, and the flowchart really just goes with yes and no, whether you are centralized or you are decentralized. And then we come with a progressive decentralization. And then the question is, where does the project find itself? Like, what rules are going to apply? Are we now talking about the DeFi rules and report and the guidelines and the recommendations that IOSCO just issued? Or are we talking about the previous report? Like, there's a place somewhere in between. And again, it's not really black and white. And we are trying to use these nicer terminology just to kind of be more approachable to the regulators, because we know what's happening in practice. Like, in practice, it's really hard to find fully decentralized projects. In practice, it's really hard to find something that is not going to look like progressive decentralization. Or even worse, maybe sometimes what we have noticed over the years is that somebody has started decentralized and then progressed towards centralization because it did not make sense, for example, for a group of people to really just continue doing what they do in a totally decentralized manner. And it was far better and faster if, for example, a group of 5 people really took control and decided a couple of things to do, to be done in a certain way. So you really have 50 shades of gray somewhere in between, and it really is going to be all about how do we now find or navigate through the rules, and maybe even issue like new recommendations for a bespoke regime that are going to be addressing that gray area somewhere in between, and are going to say, okay, let's evaluate, let's find yourself somewhere on the scale from 1 to 10, and then see what actually applies and what not.
That's a great comment, Tanya, and I think it also goes quite well with the next question that I will ask, and then we'll open the floor to questions from the audience, if there are any. But basically, what next? Because what's next? Because we were discussing the past, in some interesting details coming from India. We have been discussing the current situation, but what do you expect to happen, and what do you actually hope to happen in the future with kind of defining and regulating? So yeah, if you have a question, if you have an answer to that, that would be very, very interesting to hear.
One thing I'll say is that there seems to be a sense of urgency on the part of the regulators. I heard it from them a few weeks ago that we need to move quicker, and we need to move quicker on this. And so what I hope for is an opportunity for local consultations once regulators have considered some of the recommendations in IOSCO. Just because I think from my perspective, all the industry is always going to complain that, you know, governments aren't moving fast enough at the pace of innovation. They're not understanding innovation enough. But there's also such thing as them moving too fast. And in this case, with the way that this was put out, I really do hope that at the local level, local regulators put in more time to contemplate and consider whatever the final version of this is going to look like, by consulting with industry and actually taking in what the local industry is telling them, because the market is different in Canada than possibly in India or in some other places. And we do want uniformity and consistency, you know, across different countries. But at the same time, I do worry about the intentions or the level of understanding when it comes to DeFi as it pertains to, you know, local regulators. With some of the things that are in here, I wonder, is it a lack of understanding, or is it a situation where they're trying to kind of determine outcomes in what future products or future projects look like by providing, you know, a particular framework that people have to comply by or play in. And I think that can be good or bad depending on what it is. But yeah, from my perspective, in terms of next steps, I do worry about, you know, what are the timelines for this look like locally, and to what extent will we have a say in it? Because like we mentioned before, the political will is very few and far between on this issue. And that can be, that can result in its own challenges when it comes to what we see implemented at the regulatory level.
Yeah, I love the comment about moving too fast. My question is, how fast is too fast? Honestly, with Mika, we saw that this was a really, really extremely urgent and fast response to Libra and what Facebook actually introduced. So having all those wallets and having a stable coin. So it really now looks as almost like a prohibition. So it's regulating stable coins primarily, and then there's a bunch of other crypto assets. And it's good to have these regulations in place. But what we have noticed or observed over the process of Mika being read through and, you know, being negotiated was that there was really very little time for all the national competent authorities and for the states to be getting familiar with what it actually presents for the market, for the local jurisdictions, etc. Disregard the responses from the industry, right? So we were kind of lucky to have the EUCI at that point already established and to have the possibility to even raise our voice and say, well, maybe we should rethink how the NFTs are being defined, or maybe we should rethink how the DeFi is going to be approached here, or, you know, how about the conditions for the stable coins, etc. So with regard to that, yes, it was really urgent. I am sort of afraid that now hearing about Mika 2 already, we are really moving way too fast. As in, we don't even know, for example, who are going to be the national competent authorities that are going to be issuing licenses on the local scale. We know for certain that in some EU jurisdictions, there is very little time presented or very little time offered to the employees of the national competent authorities to get familiar with the regulation that is already sort of applicable and is coming into force very, very soon. So those types of things make me a bit reluctant, and I believe I actually speak on behalf of EUCI here, when we want to slow down and say, let's take some time to see how this is going to affect the whole space and how, for example, projects are going to be getting the licenses and how this is going to evolve further before we even start thinking about the Mika 2, before we start thinking about, let's have new regulation for DeFi. It goes, again, with the bespoke regime for DeFi as well. As in, we saw, for example, in the IOSCO report that they were mentioning the centralization powers of the stakers, of the staking companies. and this, or staking validators. And this is for sure something that have been severely discussed within the Web3 community as well. However, there are a couple of things that normally don't really get into reports like this, as in this has already been one of the community's responses, as in let's prevent the centralization of those powers. And this is how we have started preventing it in the first place. We know it's not a perfect solution. We know there's plenty to be done about that, but let's evolve, let's experiment first, and then see what are the rules, the implications, and most possibly what are the soft guidelines that we can introduce with the collaboration of the regulators. So again and again, we don't really want to be talking about hard laws. We don't want to be talking about the hard regulations. The next steps, if anything, should actually be like a step-by-step guide from the regulators, so that the industry even knows how these rules, how these recommendations apply to them in the first place, because we believe it's not really, like, not a lot of projects and people currently have a really comprehensive understanding of what awaits for them in 2024 or 2025 or 2026, even though the rules have already been presented. So there needs to be really a lot of conversations between the advocacy groups like ours, the industry and the regulators, back and forth, and constantly just seeking those explanation points. So really just guidelines, the soft law.
Aritra, do you have anything to add to this two very amazing comments?
No, I mean, first, I think we should, I'll say this with all honesty, I think we should have more women entrepreneurs in crypto and Web3 and policy. And I don't see that there's only so many of them, far and few in India. I think that has to be pushed and promoted a little, because even today, I mean, a week ago when I was at a policy thing, there's just 18 men of us and there was only one woman. I'm like, dude, like, come on, right? This is not how it's supposed to be in India, right? So that's one I think we really need to push. There are a lot of lovely 18, 19-year-old women, girls who are coders, who have done a lot of things. But we just need to promote that. That's one aspect. Second, I honestly I don't foresee a law anytime coming in India. We have elections next year in US and India. I think that's more important for a lot of other factors. That will impact a lot of things in terms of who comes in power. That will impact a lot of things which is going to happen in crypto policy in India, particularly in APAC. That's second. Third, I genuinely think, and from a policy perspective, I think even the competition should come together. Like when I say the competing companies should come together, because because that helps the narrative change a lot. That's second. And third, I think there are terminologies matter a lot, and I think you folks are very senior to me. You've done so much. I mean, terminologies matter a lot, because when you walk in like Canada, India, look at these countries, right? You go into a regulator's office, you talk to them about the cross-border payments through decentralized and nodes that you will not have control on. I mean, okay, they understand, but these boys run countries. They're powerful people who run things. I mean, you see what's happening, right? I think that is very important. Like I always say this, I get really hated for saying that RBI back in India, the Reserve Bank of India. I genuinely think the Reserve Bank of India is more decentralized than most of the chains out there. At least they have 5-6 committees before a thing is passed on, right? It's a fact. Chains don't work like so I think it's a good narrative to get users, but I think we have to move away from that, what's happening on the company fronts of most crypto companies, and we really got to be serious on using and changing these definitions of these terminologies, because that changes their mindset. Just think from their mindset, right? And fourth, the fourth thing that I really foresee happening, and it's finally happening, is the variance in the type of companies which are going to come up, which is going to impact the kind of recommendations we write in our policies, because we've only had so many types of companies which has come up in crypto and Web3. We all know that, right? For whatever market reasons and all of that. Last, I think more collaboration needs to happen between TradFi and DeFi, which again will lead to more nuanced policy making, that whatever we can offer, right? Like you've seen what's been happening with Chainlink, right? In terms of what's happening between the Swift banking ecosystem and what some companies are doing with the blockchain part of it, the messaging part of it. Now, those things need to come out, because these are actual big banks who are collaborating, right? So that business needs to be translated into certain policy boards and certain policy recommendations. Then it changes a lot of things. So that's genuinely what I think. and more cross-border approach needs to happen. Like one of the things that Anja was talking about, one of the things I did over here with a few of my friends in policy in India, without announcing it much, we translated the entire MICA, the rules that you guys have. We translated that into Hindi, our language over here, Hindi and Kannada, and we went and distributed to multiple party offices, like political offices. Like, just go read. This is what happening in Europe in crypto and all of that. They related to that. Now imagine I would have given them an English language document. It's not about the language here, but they could relate it because there were nuanced word being used. We tried explaining them in their languages. Things like that have a much more local impact. So your local MLA, local MP will then go talk to somebody upper. That somebody upper will go to talk to somebody upper. So then you have political will also coming in. Right now, my biggest problem, which genuinely needs to think, laws are okay, we can talk between countries, things like that. But how do you create political will? I don't see that happening in more. Things have happened for great for Europe, but I don't think that happening in India anytime soon in terms of massive push of a political will. If it happens, great. So that's why I said somewhere we have to push the narrative that this is contributing X amount to whatever industry. This is also impacting a local voter. Bang. Then you see policies move at breathtaking pace. So
I think I'm speaking on behalf of the team, but we would really love to see Mika in Hindi. So if you have that document, please send it our way. That would be incredible. And also on something else that you said, that you have elections next year, and the US has elections next year, and also the European Union, to a large extent, also has elections next year because we have a new parliament and the new commission coming next year. So with that being said, I think we can wrap up this amazing discussion with the thought that there's still a lot of work in front of us, and it was incredible to collaborate with you on this document. I really believe we did fantastic work, and that's just the beginning of our also future collaboration, especially with the Bharat Association. Because you joined our activities recently. And there's a question. I was screening for questions and I didn't see it. So let me see. Where did you see the question, Morva? Sorry, can you read it?
If you exit full screen, you'll see it in the full portal.
Amazing, thank you so much. Okay, so we have a few questions here. Could you share something probably about the approach, technological equivalence, risk analysis, which risks are motivated? Does it still stand a chance in the debate, or what is the relation to your approach, spectrum of decentralization, control test, centralization factors? Does this equivalence approach still stands a chance against background of IOSCO? And there's a clarification below. Sorry, say something, and mitigating, not motivating risks. So, Anya, I think that's mostly for you because you were the one discussing the centralization factors and vectors. But I'm also mindful of time, so if you can briefly respond, and then we can obviously continue this conversation afterwards.
I would say I don't have a very straight answer with regards to the technological equivalence. What I can say is that they have already started identifying a bunch of risks, as in, as previously mentioned in one of the recommendations, the operational one, the technological one, various financial ones, etc. With regards to those risks, we have been providing to them a response that risks as well should sort of be started to be categorized. Just as we are trying to now do a comprehensive study around the crypto assets typology from jurisdiction to jurisdiction, we sort of want to have this type of typology or categorization of risks as well, so that we know what we are dealing against with. This all being said, I do kind of still think that they have been putting them all together into same baskets, and they should be separated on a more granular level. So, goes the same with the question with regard to the responsible persons. Who are the responsible persons? It really demands a close evaluation of what are the responsibilities vested with each particular person, what those responsibilities are addressing, what risks are attached to those responsibilities, so that you create categories of responsible persons. Again, that being said, identifying what are the risks and what are the differences between them, you go towards recognizing what exactly are we trying to regulate, or what exactly are we trying to prevent, and what type of regulation then needs to be applied. So if there's going to be some sort of a bespoke regime for DeFi, if this is actually going to help IOSCO moving forward, I do believe that there's going to be recognition of various different risks, and that technological equivalence will for sure play a role when we move forward. With regards to the centralization factors, when you are having a spectrum of decentralization, and when you actually evaluate what are those central factors that provide control to certain people, or that actually presents the control points, you get to recognize what are the risks vested with that type of a control, or with that type of a centralization as well. So all in all, having a bit more detailed approach, having more elaborative approach towards what are the risks should definitely help. And yes, hopefully it will stand a chance. Maybe somebody else also has an answer to this question.
Great, thank you. And if you want to add anything, and also Anya that asked the question, if you want to follow up, please do that in the comments. We will get in touch and we can continue this conversation. Would be more than happy to. But I'm mindful of time and we hit the hour mark. So great job also with timing, guys. And thank you for joining. And again, thank you for all your hard work on this submission. And hopefully there will be more more opportunities for us to collaborate. And with that, I want to also thank our audience and wrap up this great conversation.
Thank you, Viara.
Thank you, Viara. CI team. Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.